Before we plunge into the complex neural pathways that control motor movement, let's first get a solid understanding of the structural and functional units that make such movement possible, namely the muscles. Our muscles are the final common pathway of all voluntary motor system output. No matter how complex an action is, or what motivates it, all behavior fundamentally occurs through the musculature. There are three types of muscle in the body: cardiac muscle, which keeps our heart pumping blood; smooth muscle, which helps control involuntary movement of various internal organs; and skeletal muscle, which is the type of muscle that controls motor activity, and is thus the type most relevant to our discussion today. Skeletal muscles, as their name suggests, are attached directly to the bones in the skeleton. They're attached by tendons, bundles of connective tissue made up largely of collagen proteins. While we often refer to our muscles in individual terms, talking about the biceps or the triceps, each of these muscles is functionally made up of many, many subelements. Each muscle is made up of many groups of muscles that are themselves composed of many subunits. Looking at the skeletal muscle under a microscope, you'll see a highly organized repeating pattern of cylindrical cells, visible as thick horizontal stripes across the muscle mass. These cells are called myocytes, myofibers, or simply muscle fibers, and they're the basic building blocks of a muscle. Note that the myocytes run in the opposite direction of the thin vertical striations. One interesting bit of trivia about myocytes is that they're multinucleated. They have more than one nucleus per cell. This curiosity is the product of the fact that the myocytes are formed from many individual precursor muscle cells, which fuse in early development to form the long, tubular bodies of myocytes. As a result, each myocyte contains many nuclei, which remain from the initial precursor cells inside a common fused cytoplasm. Myocytes are filled with myofibrils, long bands of protein. The two main proteins in myofibrils are actin and myosin. Let's zoom in on a myocyte and take a closer look at these proteins. In this myocyte, you can see that the actin and myosin units are arranged in repeating units along the myocytes called sarcomeres. The schematic shows two sarcomeres, but there are many more units present in a given myocyte. Throughout the sarcomeres, myosin is distinguishable as thick filaments, while actin constitutes thin filaments. Each thin filament of actin is surrounded by a thick filament of myosin, and every actin molecule has a myosin binding site, where the myosin molecules from thick filaments combined. Muscle contraction involves myosin binding to actin, which causes the filaments to begin sliding along one another. To keep the filaments anchored in one place, the myocyte contracts or shortens. Myocytes are made up of many contractile units of actin and myosin filaments. These repeating units are called sarcomeres and are considered the functional unit of the myocyte. The repeated array of sarcomeres in each myocyte gives the cell its striped appearance, which is why skeletal muscle is also called striated, from the Latin stria, for stripe. So when we speak of muscles, we're actually talking about bundles of myocytes, which are made up of many contractile units, which are composed of many filaments of structural proteins. And these bundles are held together by networks of connective tissue that also attach skeletal muscles to bones, allowing muscle movement to move bones around joints by either contracting or extending, or, when we need to remain rigid and still, alternating between both. Anatomically, it makes sense to arrange our skeletal muscles into three main classes, as the nervous system's motor action occurs through three different streams. One that is responsible for controlling the axial muscles in the center or trunk of our body. One that controls the proximal or girdle muscles, which are those closest to the center, such as our chest, thigh, and upper arms. And a final path that commands action in the distal muscles, which are the farthest from the center of your body and include, for example, the muscles in your hands and feet. Beyond these three main classes, there are also many muscles in our head and face, and these muscles are all innervated by a single facial nerve that originates directly from the brain, the seventh cranial nerve. Facial motor control is a particularly complex process that involves coordinated activity of many different muscles, so the facial nerve is composed of many, many axons, each projecting to a different bundle of muscle fibers and allowing for highly nuanced control of facial muscle movements. The nuance of facial expressions in humans is a particularly remarkable subcase in motor control, allowing us to communicate in subtle ways with other humans under both voluntary and involuntary control.